are now short price favourites to go 3 wooden spoons in a row. What do the Tigers need to do to turn this around? They've got Jerome Luai coming to the club next year.
Yep.
Who must be sitting back watching some of these performances with a little bit of trepidation. I know he came out during the Origin week and said, I'm 100% committed to the Tigers. I'm pumped for it, looking forward to it. That's admirable, but realistically, he would be looking at these performances wondering what he signed up for.
Yeah, but there's also a part of, I think, Jerome's makeup that I think it's a genuine statement. Like, he's the sort of guy who would be sitting back genuinely going, hey, like, wait till I get there. That's his sort of mentality.
Yep.
Once he gets that could completely change.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not until you're with a team for 2 or 3 games and you're on the back end of a losing streak, which he's never been a part of. He's never been like, I think maybe even his first year, he probably wouldn't have gone through the tribulations that or the pressure that's going to be associated with him playing at the Tigers next year. So that is something he's going to have to learn. But at the moment, he's the back-to-back-to-back champion. He's playing, the results for Origin weren't great, but there's one huge factor that played into that. And I thought it was, actually okay for New South Wales considering. So
do you think this is acceptable from this Tigers team? They're now 9 losses in a row. I know they're missing some players, but if I go through their squad and rattle off some names for you, your Clemmer, your Bateman, Utoi Kamanu, Papali'i, Coruscant, Caesar, Fainu's been great in the second row, Buller at fullback, Justin Olam in the centres. It's not the worst squad. I know the fill-ins around those players are real bit part first graders, but for example, I compare that squad to the Bulldogs squad on paper.
Yep.
Even the Dragons squad on paper.
Yep. There's
they are underperforming.
There are. Look, you're right. And they showed some. So the hard part for the Tigers too, and some of those players that you mentioned, they showed some real fight for probably the first 3, 4, maybe even 5 games of those losing streak. I think they fell short to. I remember they fell just short to the Panthers game, which was a couple of tough calls went against them. But that's the nature of being at the bottom of the table, Missile. You remember this?
Yeah.
We spoke about this all last year with the Bulldogs not getting the rub of the green. They now are seemingly getting 50-50 calls go their way this year because they've earned it, right?
Yeah.
That's just the nature of where you are on the ladder. And I guess with the referees, sometimes subconsciously they make those sorts of decisions. I will say, just talent-wise across the board, and this is what happens when you've got a lot of young guys, and sometimes I've been critical or pushed back on, fans talking about, just blood the young guys and give them experience. You have to balance it out. It has to be, you don't want to ruin some of these young guys. I'm looking at Lachlan Galvin. There were moments in that game where I was looking at him. He looks super strong. He's standing in the tackles, and it just really looked like it's getting to him. Like, he's in his 10th or 11th game now. He missed a couple of games, I think, through suspension. But it looked like it was just like, is this what first grade's like, week in, week out? The other one is Fainu, Samuela Fainu.
Yep.
I think he's going to be a great player for the Tigers. But his confidence will be checked now because he left from going from a Manly team that wasn't performing all that well with Turbo missing last year. Now he goes to a Tigers team, and he's definitely got talent, but you could see at times in that game where it's just like either, the one that stands out is when he goes to make that tackle on Ben Hunt, and I thought Ben Hunt totally overreacted by throwing the ball at him. What's he, Finu's supposed to just let him plant the ball down nicely, is he?
Yeah. It was cheeky.
It was cheeky, and he throws the ball at Finu, but you could see just like, even on that hit, he was like, he's so deflated.
Yeah.
So the biggest part for the biggest thing for Benji now with this Tigers team is making sure he somehow keeps these younger players up, in particular, like being able to
nurse them through the defeats, basically.
Yeah, that's I was trying to find the best word for it. It's a really crucial part of.
If he has, all right, they need to make a decision where the season's at now. Is the season over? if the season is over, I'm almost looking to rotate Galvin in and out of first grade to get him to the end of the season, A, uninjured, but B, with as little scar tissue as possible from this season. If they've got some hardened New South Wales Cup players, I'm almost, if I'm coming up against a Broncos or a Roosters, I'm going, you know what? I don't want Lachlan Galvin copping another 50-point shellacking, because I've seen the Bulldogs churn through some youngsters who have just ended up coming straight out of first grade, and you never see them again because they just cop that brutal initiation to first grade and never really bounce back from a confidence perspective.
Yeah, my big thing with that, and I understand it as well because it makes a lot of sense, it's too far gone now. Like, Lachlan Galvin is such a crucial part of that team. And when I look at the replacements now that, especially with Aiden Caesar being out, I think Aiden Caesar will be good for him. But if you do not play Galvin, my suggestion would be to completely rest him. Like, not even play him in New South Wales Cup.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because if you go back down to New South Wales Cup, no matter how you position that feels like a demotion. He is well and truly the future. I think he's going to be okay. He'll get through this. But if I am not playing him during that period, it's a complete rest week. Like, and it might sound funny to some fans, or if you're a Tigers fan, you're like, no, I want him to learn and go through the tribulations of what it's like being. But you're right. In every sport, we've seen it a number of times where this young prodigy or a player with a whole heap of potential has been completely burned out early in his career through being on the other end, bad end of performances like what happened to him in the Dragons last night.
Let's have a listen to what Benji Marshall had to say about the West Tigers' second half performance.
Very disappointing. We seem to say the same thing every week, which is, unfortunate. But at the same time, like, we give ourselves every opportunity. We had a week off, freshened up. We start with a lot of energy, 14-12 at half time. To have 20% of the ball and have as many errors as what we did, schoolboy errors, to be honest, unacceptable. And now, discipline, talked to you about it before the game. It is just hurting us. We find someone to get sin-binned every week, give away silly penalties, we lose our head, and unfortunately we're in a position where we can't do that to ourselves, and we do. So I'll say it again, if the actions don't change, then the players have to change, and it's unacceptable.
Can I hit you with the sliding doors moment scope? And this is particularly relevant for last night. So Tim Sheens is brought in by the prior management of the West Tigers to do a review on Michael Maguire and his coaching prowess, and then subsequently to employ a new coach. So Tim Sheens comes in, Michael Maguire's not doing the job, Michael Maguire gets sacked, Tim Sheens employs himself as the head coach, and this is all backed by your Pascoes and Hadjipentalis, the board, everyone. Tim Sheens brings in himself as head coach.
Did he sign Benji first and then said, look, there's probably a couple of years away and then I'll fill in the
I think it was him first, then Benji as the succession plan.
Yep.
Which in itself is insane. We've never seen that done before, where you bring in someone to do a review of your coach and your processes, who subsequently sacks the current coach and employs themselves. I've never seen that before, and that's sending warning alarms.
They were going after Ciraldo too, remember?
They had a dip at Ciraldo,
That's it. And then they missed, and then he decided to go himself.
But at that same time, vocally, publicly, Shane Flanagan was putting his hand up for the job, saying, I want the job, I'll do the job. Last night, we see Shane Flanagan go head-to-head against Benji Marshall, who had never coached before, had to actually go out and get his coaching license before he could even get the assistant job, his accreditation. That was an insane decision. It was insane. At the time, everyone's coming out in the papers saying, this can really work. Tim Sheens has got this record. We spoke about it on the show at the time because you were quite aware of Tim Sheens' current record over in the English Super League.
Yep, we spoke about that midway
we spoke
through
about,
last year,
that he was probably past it. Now we're seeing the repercussions of that a year, 2 years later, and poor Benji is just in the absolute cauldron now, having never even coached an age group team, an NYC team, a Jersey Flegg team, a Harold Matts team. He's now trying to find answers in first grade.
Yeah, very difficult, very difficult. When I'm watching Benji in those press conferences, and I've been watching them closely. For anyone who's listened to our content on SEN or followed us on Levels, I call them the depressors. So the press conferences from the losing coaches, because I think it's really important how they handle or how they word their frustrations. And Benji's been really good up until this point, but it's clearly showing that he's feeling the pinch. And there are signs from Benji that I'm seeing that were starting that I noticed from Steve Kearney. Like you come in with this positive, you might have been successful in his own right. So Stephen Kearney was different. He did his apprenticeship at Melbourne Storm. So a lot of people thought, Melbourne Storm, Kiwis, he was just going to flow in and completely change Parramatta Eels. Now, we now know in hindsight, and I was there throughout that period, there were just things that he wasn't able to implement, and the roster wasn't the greatest. Our playing roster at the time wasn't the greatest, and it ended up being a massive task. It ended up really wearing him down.
Yeah,
and I'm seeing the early signs of that from Benji. In the wording,
just his demeanour, even when he gets in there.
I remember Steve Kearney was this really good-looking young head coach. And then by the end of his tenure, his hair had gone all grey. He was so worn down. I remember we used to have individual video, and you could see his demeanour was just dropping and dropping. And it's I don't know why anyone would want to be an NRL. Honestly, I don't know how these guys find themselves in a position where they're I'm excited by the challenge. It is so tough, mate.
Hardest.
And Benji has a really tough task ahead of him with this young Tigers team that he's got at the moment.
All right, Mowers, we've got 2 platinum double passes to give away to the Bulldogs-Eels game on Monday. That's for our best contributors during the show. Tigers fans, 0457 736 736. Where to for your club now? Let's get positive after the break, Scope, and let's jump into the Dragons, who, as bad as the Tigers were, the Dragons were great, and they're now 7-6 to start the season. Dragons fans, 0457 736 736. We're going to go through your awesome performance last night straight after this. Welcome back to the MOWER'S Club with Scope and Missile, thanks to our partners over at Winghouse. And we will do our winger appreciation later in the show. Pretty obvious who that's going to be this week, but we won't give it away just yet. Now, let's get on to the Dragons from last night, Scope. As bad as the West Tigers were, the Dragons were awesome. They're 7-6 to start the season. Equal number of wins as the Broncos. Equal number of wins as the Roosters. They had 5 wins the whole season in 2023. Already at 7 wins for 2024. Where are the Dragons right now?
Yeah, and feel free to chip in with this, Brooksy, if you've got the mic ready to go.
But he's got the Dragons hat on.
He's got the Dragons hat on. For those that don't know, Brooksy, big-time Dragons fan, and obviously stoked with the performance last night. And you mentioned Shane Flanagan before. Got to give him a lot of credit.
Big time.
There were jobs, we just before the break, we talked about it. Shane Flanagan threw his name in the hat for the Bulldogs, for the Tigers, for multiple jobs during that 2 or 3 year span. And there were people that were hesitant to sign him off the back of what happened at Cronulla. But you can tell or you can tell the difference now between, if you look at the squads, and like he said, comparing the Tigers to Dragons, talent-wise, all not that dissimilar, but results are completely different. And that's just the veteran presence of a guy that knows what the pressure cooker of the NRL was about. Mm-hmm. He's been through plenty himself, and he's handled, I think, moments in the year where the Dragons have looked awful in a couple of games, but managed to bounce back very quickly. And in the last couple of weeks, I guess the communication and the message at halftime has been crucial as well. Penrith game, they're down 10-0, I think it was. They scored 22 unanswered to beat the back-to-back-to-back premiers with a whole heap of stars out, obviously playing Origin. But Dragons were also missing a whole heap as well. And then they were down by 2 just before half-time. Seyfarth goes over for that try. And then again, no tries conceded in the second half, Brooksy. And I guess that's when you look at rebuilding a team, a lot of the coaches, they want to start with their defence and fixing the defence up. And they've showed some really positive signs this year.
Yeah, last week was surprising with the Panthers coming back in Penrith and doing it, albeit with all the Origin players out. But last night you just saw, and I was critical of their recruitment this year, But you saw some of those guys, Raymond Faitala-Mariner, Tom Eisenhuth. He touched the ball so much last night and made so many tackles.
Too much or so much?
No, so much. A little too much, but so much. But just seeing all those, and even Kyle Flanagan, like playing his role next to Ben Hunt. Like, yeah, Dragons fans were a little critical about the signings. We haven't had that marquee signing over the last few years. And, you know, he's built this club this year on the premise of defence, and you can see that's what sort of got them those wins. And it also gets them those blowouts as well. Yes, we've had some big losses against the Roosters, that comeback against the Cowboys, where we were pretty much home and hose there.
Yep.
And it just turned around. We saw it at the Doggies game a fortnight ago. But, yeah, they're chugging along and keeping in touch with the 8, which is important.
Again, I'll go back to the recruitment, and it'd be similar to you, Missile. Outside of Stephen Crichton, there would have been a lot of question marks for Bulldogs fans and Dragons fans around their recruitment and lack of. And I think, in a way, they've been forced to play a certain style because of missing out on a lot of big names. The Bulldogs were going after a premier prop, and they just couldn't get it, and they weren't able to get it. And then with the Dragons, Brooksy, they were trying to get some strike outside plays, and they weren't able to get that. So what are they doing? They're playing a sort of grinding game, trying a power game.
Yep.
And the Bulldogs, it's the coaching of both Ciraldo and Flanagan that have been the difference in results this year, I'd say.
I've listened to a couple of interviews with Ciraldo, and he said nothing's changed with his coaching. It's just been the culture of the players that they've brought in. Shane Flanagan's made a lot of changes, it seems, to the culture at the Dragons. Let's have a listen to what Shane Flanagan had to say about the building culture at a club.
Well, I'd like to think that's the club where we're heading. That's the standards we're starting to set and starting to expose our DNA and, you know, what we want to be and where we want to go. So, you know, there's some steps, and we've taken some forward, and we've gone backwards at a few different stages during the year, but we took another one forward today, so that's a challenge. Big one next week against Manly at Brookvale, so I look at that. It's something really exciting for us, and we've got to accept the challenge and go there. Tough place to play, but enjoyable place to play.